Hi guys, Roscoe here from AmazingEV, and today we've got a very special guest. We've got Ross De Rango, who's Head of Infrastructure and Energy at the Electric Vehicle Council here in Australia.
In terms of my presence at the EVC, I started here September 2021, so I've been here a touch over 3 years.
Such is the speed of change in the EV industry that within 2 or 3 days of us recording this chat with Ross, we noticed this posting from him on LinkedIn where he's announced he's leaving the EVC to go on to bigger and better things, we hope. So we wanted to take this opportunity, play the rest of the recording and wish him all the best, thank him for his time and thank him for his contribution to the EV industry through the EVC. So today you've got the Roscoe and Ross show, and with their work that they're doing with all levels of government, we thought we'd get some insights into how the year's been, what the current state of play is, and what's happening in the future. Thanks, Ross. What a year it's been again in the EVs. That never seems to be a dull moment. And I sort of loosely titled this chat, what's your EV done to me? Because it seems like it's still an uphill battle for EVs in 2024. How do you see it?
Well, I think this year we've just crossed over 100,000 new EVs sold to market for the year, and we'll be hitting about 300,000 on the road early in the new year. So there's an awful lot of EVs out there. There's a lot of Australians who've made the choice to make the move. Out of a fleet of 15 million, that's obviously not a huge percentage. There's a lot more petrol and diesel cars out there than electric cars. This is a journey that's going to take a couple of decades. We're not going to get it done overnight.
Yeah, but sometimes the expectations just seem a little bit high, and I just wonder, how you balance that. But how did it become such a partisan issue? How did it seem to become so polarized, you think?
I think obviously we remember the previous federal election claims around EVs will ruin the weekend, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We did a little piece of an ad around that, you might recall. It was poking a certain amount of fun at that commentary. EVs are part of the global effort to decarbonise, right? To put less CO2 into our atmosphere, which is a thing we need to do in order to deal with the challenges around global warming, climate change. There have been long-standing massive efforts at counter-narrative in that area dating back as long as I've been alive. It's not overly surprising that the shift to EVs has become, to some degree, wrapped up in some of that conversation. Instead, EVs are cars, trucks, buses. So really the core question for the driver, is this vehicle actually going to meet my mission? And then after that, is it the best choice available to me? Is it cheapest to operate? Is it going to meet my needs? Increasingly, what we're seeing is there's an EV available that'll do the job and it'll cost less to run.
Yeah, and I think we're both converted, and we often sometimes preach they're converted. But, I've been involved in audiovisual and trades and all sorts of things over the years, and everything's run by motor, right? Aircon, electric power tools, hair dryers, home dishwasher, everything's an electric motor, right? So some ways, cars are the last bastion of a device that's not. So it has surprised me sometimes about how much animosity there is out there. So when we're on board, that's just such an obvious, simple solution to me, right? It's
I mean, look, no one's running a pull start two-stroke motor to run their dishwasher, right? That this is not a thing. The vast majority of equipment we use that's motorized at a domestic scale is electric equipment. It makes sense for the cars to be the same. We had electric cars on roads globally before we had petrol cars. This is not a new idea. The reason that we've had petrol and diesel for so long is that the battery technology wasn't quite there, and now it is.
I know, I'll ask you to play your hand. I assume everyone at the Electric Vehicle Council drives an EV. Is that part of the job description or not?
I drive an EV and my wife drives an EV.
Okay, well,
I'll go with there's 12 people who work at the EVC. We don't set a requirement in order to be an employee. You've got to drive an EV, but it is absolutely something
that's not part of the job description, though. But and just perhaps some of the viewers and people don't quite know that much about the Electric Vehicle Council, right? Can you take us back to its formation and how you got involved?
Yeah, sure. So the EVC was formed out of a coming together of a few folks in the industry back in about 2017. There was a recognition then at a time when EVs were really, really nascent. So we weren't talking about 300,000 EVs on the road. We were talking about more like 300 to 3,000 EVs being on the road at that sort of time frame. They recognised a need to pull together as a group to do some simple things around shifting the needle on some of the policy and legislative instruments, and maybe have a little bit of look at some of the other market settings and regulatory stuff in order to give the industry the best chance to take off. As I said, that was back in 2017. Bad Jafari, who was the CEO at that time and has only just recently wound up his tenure as CEO, was instrumental in pulling that together.
He was. He's a life force in himself, wasn't he? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, a great guy too. He's not gone out of the industry. He's just gone to work for an organisation in the industry rather than leading at the EVC. We've had Sam Johnson as our interim CEO this year after Bad's departure, and we've got a new CEO starting in January. Very excited to see the leadership continue. My presence at the EVC.
Comment on who it is, or it's still is this can we break that here or not?
Has been announced to our members, has not been announced publicly. So I'll hold fire. It'll be very public.
This won't go to print till I go to print till the 1st of Jan. So I'll embargo it for you if you like.
Even so, I'll go with. I'm not going to break that news here, Ross.
That's great. No, that's great news. Someone we might know.
I think within the energy sector, so a known individual, but again, not my place to break that news here. In terms of my presence at the EVC, in terms of my presence at the EVC, I started here September 2021, so I've been here a touch over 3 years. My background was 13 years at NHP, which is an electrical equipment manufacturer, supplier into the Australian market. Every Sparky, most electrical engineers in the country will know who NHP is, but outside of the trade, not really a particularly well-known organisation because they're not a business-to-consumer type player. My work there in the last few years was specifically to do with EV. My boss at the time essentially gave me the role of go figure out what the next big thing is going to be. So I took a look around and figured out pretty promptly that EV was going to be the thing. And that's where I spent my time from 2016 through till 2016, 17, through till 2021 when I came to the EVC. The thing that triggered that switchover, I was doing a bunch of work at that time in the National Construction Code around making sure that new apartment buildings went up EV ready. From the point of view of my employers at NHP, that made sense because building apartment buildings ready for EVs means building them with more electrical equipment in it. So there's a convergence of self-interest and what's good for the community. And obviously doing that work brought me to the attention of lots of folks who had a broad view of what do we need to do as a country in order to get ready for this big wave of EVs.
Exactly. And then can we get a bit more insight into who the Electric Vehicle Council actually represents?
Yeah, sure. So the members page on our website is probably the go-to.
I guess there's a broad number of players there, which maybe some aren't naturally associated with EVs.
So the obvious ones, right? The people who make the cars, the people who run the energy networks, the people who sell the electricity, the people who make and supply the EV chargers. They're obviously members, have been for a long time. The car rental companies, the fleet operator, the people who are running large fleets of vehicles and are looking for ESG goals to move those vehicles to electric are members. The organisations that are perhaps a little less obvious, right? So I'll use one example of a member who you wouldn't immediately think would be a member of the EVC. Stryker are an outfit that make defibrillators. Their interest in the transition is that as we go to a future where every mechanics workshop is going to involve mechanics working near 400 and 800 volt batteries, it's probably a pretty good idea for those mechanics workshops to have defibrillators on the wall, like you would see in any shopping centre or in many businesses. Businesses that are involved in making and supplying that kind of equipment have an interest in the transition as well. The EVC membership base loosely is comprised of a large number of corporates who see for themselves some role in the future involving lots of electrified road transport. And that's a pretty broad brief, right? $50 billion a year worth of new cars get sold into the market. In amongst that, there's an awful lot of organisations playing.
once the groups get together, and I won't go into too much the structural dynamics of how it works, but you've got to then step into the corridors of power. Can you tell us a bit about that and how that works in terms of taking a bit of policy or taking something that you've taken it to government?
Yeah, absolutely. So if I think about the layers of government involved, we do a lot of work at federal government level. We do a lot of work at state government level. Increasingly, we're also working at local government level. We have 3 layers of government, and they've all got different roles, different capabilities, different strengths. The things that local government are exceptional at, federal government, generally speaking, doesn't do much of, right? And vice versa. At federal government level, we engage with ministers and ministers' offices. We also engage at a departmental level with the Energy Department, with the Transport Department. And at state government level, similarly, as and where we need to engage at a ministerial level, we do so. And we've got regular meetings with most of the state government departments that are responsible for energy and transport. We're often part of bringing those departments together, because state and federal governments are big organisations, right? It's not always the case that the left hand knows what the right hand is doing. And sometimes it's down to organisations like us to build some bridges.
And look, generally, ACT seems to be fairly receptive. High penetration on new and, parliamentary friends of EVs. I gather you get a reasonable reception down there under the existing environment.
Yeah. Oh, look, we get a generally good reception most places we go. The recognition at a political level that this is a transition that is happening is there, right? We're not seeing much in the way of pushback to, no, you can't have EV. It's more, what do we need to do in order to smooth the pathway to enable the choice the consumer wants to make? Yeah, sometimes that's a legislative thing. Sometimes that's you need to engage with ministers. You need to get the legislation right. Vehicle efficiency standards are an example there. Sometimes it's at an agency level, right? Sometimes it's down to something like, as I touched on earlier, we need to fix the building code, or we need to fix the wiring rules, or we need to fix the electrical regulations. So depending on what it is that needs doing, that defines where and how we engage.
Yeah, and I must say, knowing you, I know that you're part of the energy infrastructure division, and I'm dragging you a little bit into EV territory, into the world of AmazingEV and used EVs. But I also know you're pretty happy chatting about that. But what comes out clearly is there's an incredible number of pillars involved in this, and the complexity of it. There's a hell of a lot to it than you possibly imagine. Simplistically, just saying to everybody, let's just buy an EV, right?
Yeah, you've got a large number of people who are accustomed to petrol and diesel. You've got a large system that supports the existence of road freight being petrol and diesel. We're going to move from that over time to those things largely being electrified. And there's an awful lot of stuff that needs to get done and built and sorted out in order to make that smooth. Happily, it's not all going to happen overnight. We're not waving a magic wand and disappearing internal combustion engines. We've got time in hand to do it, but it is going to be a multi-decadal piece of work. And even look, at the end of it, there's still going to be people with Holden Commodores with club plates on them, right? Because there's still people who drive around in Model T4. At the notional end of this journey, that Holden Commodore with club plates might have its fuel delivered to the driveway by an autonomous electric drone because the local petrol station doesn't exist anymore. But some of those vehicles will still be out there.
I know, and as an infrastructure guy, I guess electricity distribution, just if we dig deeper just slightly for a minute, is electricity distribution is a completely different model. You turn on the wall, it's theoretically comes straight from the generation power source, right? I mean, we know it's all more complex than that, whereas petrol or fuel's gone from one tank at the port or a ship to a port to a truck to another sub-tank at a service station. They've had 100 years to get an incredible infrastructure of storage facilities along the route. And if we had the same with batteries, it would be a much simpler situation. But we're only 2 or 3 years into a journey. That's it's a long journey to invest in that infrastructure. And again, I didn't want to dwell too much on that. We could talk all day about that as well. And reminding ourselves that there were only 3 cars, really, 3 or 4 cars available 2 or 3 years ago to buy as an EV, and now we're 100, 150. So I'm just wondering, is it time for the government maybe to step aside? What would the world look like if there weren't so many incentives for people to buy EVs, right? How do you think we'd the world would look as we sort of get to that stage?
Yeah, so look, the role of government in an environment like this, so not just EV, but generally speaking, the technological shift that is happening and that is desired, government has a range of different levers it can pull to modify the speed with which the change happens. So in the case of moving to electric vehicles, if we think about public charging infrastructure, particularly in remote parts of the country, if you leave that entirely to the private sector, it'll take a very long time for really robust networks of high power public charging to exist in remote parts of the country. And that'll have an effect on the individual who's thinking about driving an EV, who does 95% of their driving in the urban environment, but once in a blue moon drives out into the boondocks, right? That person will look at the absence of infrastructure and say, can't buy an EV yet. And so they'll stick with petrol or diesel. So there's definitely a role for government in putting the horse and the cart in the right order with respect to rolling out enough infrastructure, priming the pump and getting it going. And then there's a cutover point in which will happen soonest in the most urban environments where that level of government support for infrastructure can be wound back. So today, for example, if I'm thinking about high power public charging equipment in a place like a shopping centre, in a suburb that is characterised by lots of people without off-street parking, the need for government support for that kind of deployment is far less than the need for government support if you're 300 kilometres away from a capital city and providing a piece of infrastructure that only gets used a couple of times a week. Support for the vehicles is similar, right? We see government support for all manner of what's termed consumer energy resources. If you want a more efficient air conditioner or a replacement for your gas hot water system or a home battery, there's all manner of structures and incentives to bring that on quicker because government has determined that it's in the national interest to bring that transition on quicker. In terms of what would happen if you turned off all the support tomorrow, then the transition would slow down, right? Which is why we're not advocating for it. The mission of the EVC is to accelerate this transition, not slow it down.
I think without getting too political, I think we've seen that in New Zealand quite clearly there. I think there's a case study in turning the tap off over there.
Yeah, so for anyone not familiar, New Zealand had a federal government very, very supportive of EV up until the end of last year. The new incoming government not as supportive of EV and ended a whole lot of programs. And as a result, the uptake rate of EVs has dropped precipitously. New Zealand are a little different to Australia in that they've got 2 layers of government rather than our 3. So in Australia, you've got federal government and state government, both of whom have control over a lot of useful levers. So we're not quite as at much risk in this country in terms of what does a change of government mean. But obviously our work involves working with all layers of government to make sure they're all doing things that are useful to support the transition.
No, that's a good point because at the moment, broadly, I'd say, perhaps to agree or disagree, that state government in New South Wales in particular is in line with federal government and extremely supportive, as you said, in many ways. And that's still relatively reflective across the country, not completely, but relatively. But I take that one step further. Listening to people that are anti-EV or don't like the way their taxpayers' money is being spent, again, without getting too political. And do you think the fact that some of the animosity and some of the divide is caused by people and being pissed off by these subsidies or being annoyed by these subsidies that are out there and if they allow a free market? Again, just in terms of debate, whether that is causing some further divide between people who disagree and don't like EVs for that reason?
I would go with, as an Australian taxpayer, I will always find room to question precisely what my taxes are spent on. I think the treasurers have an impossible task. If the task is you've got to keep 100% of people happy, that's not going to be how it goes. The role in allocation of government money really is one of what's the national interest? How do we make sure that we do the right thing by the populace as a whole over time? And some individual sectors will be happier or less happy around the decisions that get made.
And the reason that we've examined it a lot and really looked at it, and the reason I ask is because we're always looking at the adoption rates for used EVs as well. New cars, obviously, pretty good, but not as strong as it should have been or could have been. I like the figure that's out there at the moment, but yeah, perhaps are you guys happy with the adoption rate?
Yeah. So look, characteristically, the people after the early adopters are the early majority, right? So there's lots and lots of charts and graphs and pretty pictures you can
Yeah,
pick up from anywhere on the internet demonstrated. Early adopters largely are either already bought or already buying. We're at a point where roughly one new vehicle in 10 being sold in the country is an EV. So
yeah,
pretty easy to say, yeah, the early adopters are fairly well convinced and they're making the
yes.
call to buy it. So we have not converted the bulk of the fleet yet, because obviously, even once you've got 1 in 10 of the new buyers in an EV, the total on road is about 2% of the vehicles on road, right? So about 1 car in 50 getting around on our roads today is electric, can be plugged into the wall. In some suburbs, in some jurisdictions, the number's significantly higher. So you touched on ACT before. Awful lot more electric vehicles as a percentage of the on-road fleet getting around in ACT than in some other parts of the country. And that reflects higher percentage uptake rates. Are we entirely satisfied with how many EVs are being bought? No, of course not. We're the industry peak body. Our job is to accelerate the uptake rate of EVs. So there's always room for more. The work being done around making sure that consumers are ready, consumer acceptance of this is a new technology, it's time to at least consider going from what you're used to going to something new. That's going to become a big part of the work for everyone who's in the industry, because you've got a lot of people who are accustomed to petrol and diesel cars, and shifting to EV is a change. So there's a big consumer education piece there. There's a big piece around test drives. There's a big piece around making sure that this ask of consumers to consider the new technology is paired with the information from trusted sources to enable them to be comfortable at least giving it consideration.
And so with the festive season approaching, wish you all a happy Christmas from AmazingEV to the Electric Vehicle Council. And if Ross De Rango had one wish for the new year for EVs, what would that be?
I think over the festive season, there's going to be a lot of those 100,000 drivers that have picked up an EV this year that are doing their first big EV road trip. My wish would be, over the summer holidays, be kind to each other. If you're at a high power public charging station in your EV and there's someone who's struggling, there's someone who clearly doesn't know what they're doing, lend them a hand. Leave home in the morning for that road trip with a full charge, and if you can, charge up at the place you're staying as well. Don't put more burden on the public infrastructure than you need to, because that'll maximize the chance that everyone can charge when they need to without having to worry about queuing. And stay safe. Enjoy the roads, enjoy the summer break, have a good one, and we'll see you all next year.
Thanks, Ross. Much appreciated, and good luck, and hope to catch up with you again soon. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
No worries. Thanks, Roscoe. Bye.